Hi there, and welcome to the podcast Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. With increased awareness and acknowledgement of change being required as per lifestyle and general life and living issues relating to the environment, it should come as no surprise that workplaces are also feeling pressures to conform. Companies are increasingly being either scrutinized or praised by the public for the way they operate their businesses. And rightfully so, in that if we as caretakers of this planet wish to remain thriving as a species, the reconsideration and challenging of previously accepted norms has now become a necessity. Thankfully, education and industry have adapted to allow for new disciplines specializing in this environmental consulting to take shape. Resultantly, eco-shepherds, if you will, have been found guiding all sorts of enterprises towards more sustainably minded methods and practices. Their efforts have allowed companies and certain industries to become more effective in critically examining their own best practices. And this has helped to create new modes of operandi, which are surely better aligned for creating a greener pathway forward. On today's show, my guest is such a consultant, and she's been lending her voice and efforts to an industry that is in much need of change, as per its traditionally negative environmental footprint that it has been leaving. Zena Harris is the bold visionary, founder, and president of the Green Spark Group, a Vancouver-based sustainability consulting firm that serves the motion picture industry in the United States and Canada. Zena has worked with studios such as Apple TV, Amazon, Disney, Fox, HBO, and others to implement sustainable practices on film and TV shows. She also works with the PGA Green Sustainable Production Alliance Consortium under the Green Production Guide banner. Zena holds a master's degree from Harvard University in sustainability and environmental management and applies her 15 plus years of experience in sustainability in several sectors to the motion picture industry. She is the creative director of the Sustainable Production Forum and participates on several industry committees in the USA, Canada, and internationally. And with all that stated, Zena, it's an absolute honor to welcome you to the show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, really excited to get into this. I mean, I'll say this right off the top. When I came across your profile, I think it might have been on LinkedIn. I was kind of blown away by just the type of work that you do. And, quite frankly, I was not aware of this major shift, this green shift that was occurring within your industry as well. And it was also compelling. So I was eager right from the get-go to have a conversation with you. So again, I'm really looking forward to it all.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, I'm looking forward to diving in. I love talking about this.
Yeah, perfect. Well, why don't we then? Let's launch into the first segment. It's something called Coloring Wikipedia. And basically, it's a segment here where I just read off a definition of the guest profession. I like to do it for a few different reasons. One, it kind of brings everyone up to speed about what the profession is all about. And then two, kind of allows for discussion to take place because sometimes these definitions don't align all that well. And sometimes they are. Sometimes they do align perfectly. But either way, it allows for discussion. And then thirdly, I think as a professional, at times we put our own stamp on what we do, and it can be very different. That the title might be the same, but the work that you do might be very different than somebody else within the industry. So putting it all together kind of amounts to this, like I said, nice launching point. So I have you down here as an environmental consultant, and let me just read that off for you. And after I do, maybe you could comment. Does this sound good?
Okay.
Great. All right, here we go. Environmental consultant. Environmental consultants ensure that clients maintain an appropriate measure of compliance with environmental regulations. Such professionals have deep knowledge on environmental regulations, which they can advise particular clients in the private industry or public government institutions to help them steer clear of possible fines, legal action, or misguided transactions. There it is, short and sweet. But first thoughts, what do you think of that?
I think that sounds great as a textbook definition.
Yeah.
But like you said at the top, it doesn't quite encompass what I do or kind of how I think about the work that I do. Yes, uh, I am talking about the environment in my day-to-day, interactions with clients and whatnot. Absolutely. That's what why the company was founded, was
Yeah.
to, help the environment. But I think of myself as a sustainability consultant. And when I think of sustainability, I'm thinking of it in kind of a broad term. I'm not only thinking of the environmental aspects, but I'm also thinking about people, and I'm thinking about culture, and I'm thinking about governance and how all of that ties together. And I'm thinking about it in a very holistic way.
Mm,
So not really, a narrow focus, but how do we bring all of those parts together, and how do we think through systems when we're talking about a film production, or a studio company, or an industry organization? What
yeah.
are all of those aspects? So that's how I approach sustainability consulting.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. There's one word that I sort of picked up on in the definition here that I was curious to follow up on. And it was the word regulations. Such professionals have deep knowledge on environmental regulations, helping them to avoid fines and, steer clear of all these other misguided transactions, I think is what it says. But as a lot of this is still kind of evolving, like governments and policymakers are still trying to come up with ways that, one, appease the public, and then two, are serving the needs of the environment and the planet. Be curious to explore that word just a little bit more, like from your experience in probably the various jurisdictions that you've been operating in outside of, well, within Vancouver and elsewhere perhaps. Are these regulations like set at times, or are they still kind of shifting and moving around, or flat out just not even being there? I mean, what would you say to that?
Um, There are some there, yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And our industry, like any others, would need to comply with, certain regulations. What's interesting about the film and TV industry is that we are kind of a compilation of many different industries. So, when a municipality or a jurisdiction puts forth waste regulations, for example, for everybody to follow, we of course would have to follow that, or we get
Yeah.
penalized with a fine. Same with air quality, and sometimes air quality regulations, for example, in California, would apply to vehicles and equipment and that sort of thing. And our vehicle rental companies and other equipment suppliers would need to comply with those, or provide
Yeah.
equipment that complies with those. So in those instances, yes.
Mm,
But do we get a pass sometimes because we're the film industry? Yeah, that's happened,
yeah.
right?
Mm,
So I mean, we have the ability to shut down major freeways to
yeah.
shoot
Right.
something. So
Right.
like, we do sometimes get those kinds of perks. But I wouldn't say that we want those kinds of perks when thinking about the environment
Yeah. Yeah.
at all.
I, I guess a follow up here, with everything that's been going on with climate change and everything else, it would seem to be that there has been a little bit more discussion on it as of late, say in the last 3 to 5 years, is mounting, and there's probably been new regulations put forth. How has that been managing that aspect of your business? Where, for example, you're shooting in one location, and last year these certain regulations were in place, and okay, you knew them and you're complying with them, of course. And now this year, or in this next project, you have this, and this now. Has that started to occur? I mean, it must be to a degree.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, that happens, right?
Yeah.
There's always something new to pay attention to, or something that, regulation that may have been put forth and in a phased approach,
Right.
to pay attention to. So there's always new information coming onto the table. And so I think for for us in our consulting practice, and even for productions, like, we all need to stay on top of what's going on out there.
Yeah.
And the landscape is changing, and it's both exciting and a little daunting. And it can also provide the opportunity for confusion. So we, try as best we can to stay on top of local regulations. And sometimes we go into jurisdictions we haven't worked before, and we have to really, read up, talk to the locals, figure out what's going on, find out what they're worried about, and help advise the production as best we can given those circumstances.
Okay. Yeah, it clears things up. Thank you. One
Yeah.
other follow-up on all this, I suppose, within this segment is in returning maybe towards, I don't know, the practicalities and just day-to-day sort of work and what you do. Maybe you could fill listeners in a little bit on that. We spoke about the regulations and whatnot, but maybe just adding a little bit more flavor in terms of what your job is all about and what your company does might be helpful.
Sure. So the company GreenSpark Group is a sustainability consulting firm, and so we have team members that work both on production and with studio or corporate clients, with industry organizations. We have a whole team working on the Sustainable Production Forum that you mentioned, which is our annual event. And so my job as the founder of this company is to really remove barriers for my team members so they can do their best work.
Okay.
And then I have a couple of projects that I lead, and then a lot of outreach otherwise, as well as making sure the business stays in business. So those are kind of, broadly speaking, the things that I'm looking at, and also, trying to make sure we are doing the best work we can, and staying on top of, as you say, what the trends are, what's happening in the industry, what the regulations are, et cetera. So we're constantly looking at that. But really practically speaking, we are all a completely remote team. And so that means gathering at the top of the week to figure out what the week's going to look like, what our key, project milestones are for the week, how we can, support each other. And then I follow up with everyone individually throughout the week to make sure they have what they need, address any issues, brainstorm on what their projects are, et cetera. And then I'm focused on
Yeah.
on my key clients. So
Yeah. Okay.
that's kind of what it looks like.
Okay. All right. Well, I imagine, I mean, probably you're not going to have typical days, typical weeks with the line of work that you're doing when you've got a couple projects on the go. I'm sure you're being pulled in several different directions, and as are many of your team members, I'm guessing. When things are
Yeah.
a little bit slower, it's going to be a little bit different too, I'm guessing. But all the
Hmm.
same, it still seems to be an exciting line of work. And yeah.
Yeah, we like to say there's never a dull moment. There's always something that keeps us on our toes, and just, new, interesting, different, challenging information going on. So um, I would say, there's no real typical week. It's kind of rolling with things, and the team does a really good job of rolling with things when challenges uh, are posed on production, or timeframes change with projects, that sort of thing. So,
Excellent. Well,
mhm,
in that vein, why don't we roll into a new segment here, Zena? I've
sounds
got
good.
something lined up, a Q&A discovery. And basically here, I'd like to kind of dig into your background a little bit more. I understand that when I was researching you and all that you do, originally, previous to getting your Harvard master's degree in sustainability, environmental consulting, or environmental management, corporate sustainability, you had an undergrad in psychology.
Hmm.
And I'd love to know how that shifted into the line of work that you're doing right now. Perhaps you could fill listeners in on that too.
Yeah, yeah. Early on, I was really interested in kind of a field of psychology called industrial and organizational psychology. So, how organizations work,
Hmm.
the psychology of work.
Hmm.
And I just find that to be quite fascinating. I draw on that all the time now in my work, and I read a lot in that vein. And I just think it provided quite an interesting foundation for for the work that I'm doing now with a lot of different types of people, in a lot of different types of the work on production or in the corporate world. So so early on, I started out of undergrad working at a large engineering company. And I worked in the human resources department, and I was on a mergers and acquisitions team,
Okay.
which meant that I would go to those newly acquired companies and I would
Right.
integrate them in. And that was just a fascinating experience, and taught me a lot about people, about work,
That
about
must
what
have
I
been
was
a gold
training on.
mine of relating to your studies, right? Like everything going on there. Wow. Yeah. That must have been perfect for you.
Exactly, exactly. And that kind of opened the door to, just kind of this curiosity, what I was training on when I was bringing folks into the parent company, et cetera. I just knew, the systems weren't quite right. And what does this mean? And where's the efficiency? And, started asking, myself all of these
Yeah.
questions. And how do I find out more about this? What does it mean? And then I
Hmm.
stumbled upon corporate sustainability. And that's what I went to get my master's on and learn more
Okay.
about. So
Okay. And that just led you down this whole different path. Huh. How fascinating. It's really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly not the most like linear or sort of direct path to where you ended up. And I'm thinking, well, I definitely would not have guessed that to be the case. I mean, connecting the dots that way, but really, really interesting. Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. Well, I have another question here within this segment. And in prepping for this talk, I came across some information that just absolutely floored me, quite frankly. And I might add that, like, intellectually speaking, when I discovered this, like, I could make sense of it just based on the context of where we're at within the world right now. But it was the statistics that got me. So let me just read this off for you and for listeners, and then maybe you can comment. So here goes. In film and TV production, the main sources of carbon emissions are transport and energy. According to the report Screen New Deal, the average big budget film production produces 2,840 tons of CO2 equivalent. It would take 3,709 acres of forest a year to absorb this amount. Okay, now before you comment, I have one other thing here that I discovered in your LinkedIn bio. I did my research. That is about your vision for the industry, and it's as follows: to change the climate of an entertainment and transform the way the industry approaches its craft. Now, I suspect that these two bits of information here are related, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, bold vision, I hope, and something
Yeah,
we strive for all the time. But you're right. In reading that quote, you're right. The folks at an industry organization out of the UK called Albert and others put together this report called the Screen New Deal, and then a few months later, actually, the Sustainable Production Alliance in the US put out a report, very similar findings. So we've been collecting data over the years, or as the industry has been collecting data over the years, we went from what was focused on early on, in when we talked about sustainability in the industry, which was waste, because that's what we could see. But then as data was being collected, what we now see through the data is that we really have a problem with our transportation and energy consumption, and on the transportation side, I'm talking about the fuel that goes into the vehicles, the trucks, and also the fuel that goes into the equipment.
yeah.
So it's really fuel consumption that we're talking about.
I understand it
Yes,
was diesel, mainly diesel that was used. Lots of
there's a lot
generators.
of diesel.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the key pieces of equipment on a film and TV production is a generator, because productions need power,
Yeah.
and they bring their own source of power to wherever they're shooting. And so for many, many years, that diesel generator has been the staple of a production. And so, in thinking about how to change the climate of entertainment, we're thinking like, okay, um, does it always need to be a diesel generator? Or if what we're really after is power, how else can we get that power,
Right.
right? So thinking through things like that over the years, as we've seen more of this data and really tried to understand where the major impacts are, it's shifted what we've been focusing on.
Hmm.
And at the same time, other players in the industry ecosystem have been developing, these battery power stations and, other, incentives, through local municipalities, et cetera. So, there's a lot of learning that's gone on over the last few years, and the data has really helped us to understand
And really
where the
crystallize
major
it, sounds like.
impact are. Yeah, yeah.
Impacts, and then also I suppose like in sharing that information or becoming aware of it, where different companies or consulting firms like yours can come in and be like, okay, this is a spot that we have to start identifying. We got to find better solutions for it. And imagine you'd be able to pinpoint areas that are becoming or that have been problematic, at least in the past, and which could be addressed potentially using existing technology or emerging technology.
For sure, for sure. And I think what's also really helpful is now we know what we need to train people on, or as a consultant and working across multiple projects, we have a lot of stories and case studies that we
Mm,
can bring to bear when we're talking to people. And it's really helpful for, that generator operator on one side of the country to hear, like, yes, it's possible because we have all these stories, even though that's not the norm,
yeah.
or, really, they haven't really had exposure to new ways of doing things in their jurisdiction. But there's a lot of great things going on out there,
Yeah.
and we can definitely see the shift. So
Yeah, yeah. I hate to put you on the spot here, but would you be able to, I don't know, to think of one of those case studies perhaps, and you don't have to think of data or anything like that, but even just like some, examples of how, I don't know, this one particular production shifted and used alternative sources of either energy or were addressing some of these environmental issues on set, maybe.
yeah, well, I have a ton of stories.
Okay,
So
perfect.
but I mean, I remember in the early days when battery power stations were just coming onto the market. There was a company in Vancouver called, or it still is, a company in Vancouver called Portable Electric. And I just remember I was I'm friends with the founder of that company, and I remember calling him up and saying, "Hey, I've got a production that's receptive to trying new things. Can I have one of your units for a day?" And he brought it over. We loaded it in my car. I drove it to production, put it out there, had folks bang on it, see what they thought. It's that kind of stuff where we were really kind of it's a bit of the Wild West, in the early
Right.
days, and just getting this new equipment onto production so people could take a look at it and see what they thought. Um, and you know, early days, we were also thinking a lot about waste, as I said. And one of my early productions was the X Files, and we used sculpting foam for the spacecraft,
Hmm.
um, and usually that stuff would go to the landfill. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really bad stuff, but we found a way to recycle it in Vancouver, and so a lot of that was recycled, and that was a really big win at the time.
Okay.
So I want to say, now we are really focused on electrification and decarbonization, but we also need, like I said, kind of a holistic approach. So we do need to think about you know the reuse and materials
Yeah, and the
and the
materials actually
waste process.
being used on
Yeah,
the actual on set,
on
it's funny. Yeah,
set.
I was just thinking like, thinking just batteries, thinking of things that are in behind, but actually, yeah, part of the actual production, the set itself, like the UFO and I suppose in X-Files. What's
Yeah.
also interesting there is, I mean, that show's been off air for quite some time now. So like this shift, I guess it started quite some time ago then in essence, I suppose, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, um, when was that? 2012, 2013, something
Yeah.
like that. But folks have been thinking about this when I was doing my research. It really started coming onto the scene in 2006. timeframe.
Hmm.
And studios started staffing up and all of that. So that's kind of a big milestone in the awareness of the industry and thinking through sustainability.
Well, that's certainly encouraging to hear as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, continuing on with this discussion, I have another question here, and it's relating to Vancouver, where your HQ is. And in terms of having and operating a business there, and in terms of that city and what they do for policy development and the setting of new standards, I understand that they have been a bit of trailblazers in that sense. Maybe you could shed a little light on that, the role that Vancouver, the city itself, has played within the motion picture industry. I know it is a bit a major hub of a lot of different productions, but in terms of setting the direction on, environmental standards and so on, could you comment on that?
Sure, sure. I continue to marvel at the way the industry and other stakeholders, the city of Vancouver, the local BC Hydro, the utility company, all of the stakeholders in the ecosystem collaborate. I recently wrote a piece and called for radical collaboration, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the example in Vancouver and the way that happens. And I feel very fortunate to have had a little piece of that, or sparked some inspiration maybe
Mm,
locally. But that that group of folks uh, is just, they are open and they want to help the industry. They're kind of mission driven, right?
right.
Um, and so early on, I mean, we mentioned the Sustainable Production Forum, and one of the things that I remember happening as a result of the event and just getting people together, getting the stakeholders together, is
Yeah.
I think it was 2017, and I invited like the guy at the city of Vancouver who wrote the EV ecosystem strategy to sit
Wow.
on a panel. And so he spoke about EV infrastructure and what was coming down the pike. And after the panel, the Q&A session, the city film office representative raised her hand and said, "Hi, I work in the film office. It's nice to meet you." And they started up, a conversation, and more city folks got together, and it's just evolved. And sort of the foundation there, or the sort of industry catalyst, if you will, is an organization called Real Green, and they really they bring the industry together, and they have committees
Hmm.
that focus on certain things, and one of them is a clean energy committee, and we have got folks from all of the stakeholder groups coming together to specifically focus on clean energy. And that is where the city of Vancouver has really excelled, because they worked with industry to come up with key filming locations where they could start thinking about putting in electrical kiosks for industry to plug in, and they
Mhm.
are well on their way. We are working to map out where generators park so that we can really, so
Yeah.
it's been quite a collaborative effort, and the city of Vancouver has an incentive where if you're shooting anywhere in the city and you can show that you've taken a generator out of production, if you will, and use clean technology, you get 50% off your film permit for the
Wow.
day. Well,
Wow.
that is significant
That is.
because that pays for your battery power station for that day. Or if you're plugging into the grid, you've just saved a lot of money because
Wow.
electricity is cheap compared to, renting and fueling a diesel generator.
Yeah.
So that's huge. That's huge.
Massive, isn't it?
And just by doing that, it has encouraged crew to take advantage. And even without a kiosk going in, crew members have figured out how to remove these diesel generators from their kit that day. And something like, and I remember Jeff Teole from the city of Vancouver quoting this. So it's like something like 30% of productions over a year and a half long period have taken advantage of this and done this. So it's just something like 600 generators being removed from
Wow,
operation
that's
in that
significant.
time frame. It's huge. It's
Yeah,
huge.
yeah.
So
Considering those numbers we were just kind of reading off before, I mean that's massive. Yeah.
yeah, Yeah, so it's a big success. They've got a strategy, they're working on, it's a journey, but
There's a
it's
mission.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they're
there's a
mission
mission
driven.
there.
So yeah.
Have you noticed by any chance some of those incentives or policies being, taken up in other parts of the country or even outside of the country, perhaps?
There's a lot going on. A lot of countries are paying attention to this. Whether it's exactly the same or not, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, Germany is doing a ton of work in this space, and the UK is always, they're doing a lot of work in this space. I mean, there are a lot of folks,
Yeah.
but
Sorry to
folks are
interrupt.
paying attention. They're
Yeah.
calling. They're calling
Yeah.
Jeff Tioli at the city of Vancouver and asking what's
I
going on. I
bet.
suspect so. Um,
Bet. What about really quickly here? One last question in terms of following up on this. The state of California, how are they doing? Because typically they've been fairly progressive, at least from an outsider's perspective, on environmental issues, and obviously a large part of the film industry being based there. How are they faring on things from your experiences?
yeah, well, like I said, the California Air Quality Board definitely has regulations for that, and we all have to
Yeah.
comply and that sort of thing. All industries do. Same with waste, etc. But when we're looking, we're trying to be proactive. Um, they too are interested, I think, in what's going on in Vancouver and other jurisdictions as well. And interestingly, the Sustainable Protection Alliance just a couple of weeks ago put out a report of regional data where it's looking at carbon emissions per region and
Mm,
what is really driving that. And LA is one of those regions. So when we look, what is a really key thing to focus on in LA is EV infrastructure or plugging into the grid,
yeah.
because they use a lot of fuel compared, maybe to a couple other jurisdictions, a lot of fuel in the LA basin.
Hmm.
So knowing that, the city can focus on that effort and get the
That's
word
right.
out, and the film commission can as well. So
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging. It's encouraging to
yeah.
hear. Yeah, and it's nice. It's nice to hear that Vancouver has taken a bit of a leadership role on all of that and how that information is being digested and hopefully used to, power through, other further developments in other countries or municipalities. So excellent.
Mhm.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, I do have one last question in this segment, and it's in line with everything we've been speaking about thus far. And it's another quote here from a different consultant within your industry who does similar work. And she noted how the biggest challenge, okay, is related to a hearts and mind challenge, is what she said, which is to convince crews that they can get by with less. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about that and your thoughts.
Generally, I do agree with the hearts and minds idea for sure, for sure. But I don't know if we need to convince crews. From my experience, they know very well what they want to do or what the issues are in
Hmm.
their area of work. What I think is even more fundamental than hearts and minds, I guess, is um, what I call, or what is called, psychological safety.
Okay.
And um, and by that I mean, do crew really feel empowered to make suggestions? Do they feel like they can, take something to their department head, and will
Mm,
that person be receptive to what they have to say? Will that department head, take that to the producer
yeah.
and make a recommendation? Does the crew member feel like, their department head has their back, and if they do try something?
Mm,
And from what I have, what I observe more often than not is no, that is
mm,
not the case. And
mm.
so for me, that is, eh, you know that's a barrier to progress.
Sure is. Yeah.
And because crew members do feel like if they make the suggestion, they might get their head bitten off, or
Yeah, of
if they
course.
if they
Yeah.
do something they might mess up. And
Yeah.
what does that mean? They might lose their job.
Right.
And so the stakes are too high.
Mm,
And so there's no sort of freedom to express yourself beyond, this very narrow way. And I find that to be, um, I find it to be an area where I think we need to pay more attention
mm.
and really focus on improving, because I think that's a barrier to, being open and courageous and trying, to integrate sustainable practices into your work.
Yeah, I love that answer for a couple of reasons. One, it kind of circles back to your background, your undergrad. You can really see the integration there of some of that knowledge and what you've continued on, learning and how that applies to your work right now. And this type of thinking applies outside of just what you're doing within the motion picture industry, obviously within any organization. But I suppose, there is power in just acknowledging that and being aware of it, because then you can start to package things up for people and hopefully allow them to present information to their superiors, to their bosses, in such ways that they aren't going to get their heads bitten off, that they're going to present it in a way that it is reasonable, and that maybe it should be taken seriously. And it's all about, I guess, that positioning and packaging it. And if you're aware of what these barriers are going to be from somebody above you, well, then you might be able to, think creatively and have some workarounds to it all. So yeah, I really appreciate that answer. It's really insightful.
Well, thanks. Yeah. I mean, I think about it a lot.
I bet.
So,
I bet. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
One last question on that too, a follow up. Have you noticed a shift on that? Like in terms of, I guess, people being a little bit more open minded? I'm guessing there might be, just because of these issues, environmental issues becoming, it's near daily reports of extreme weather and different things, within this region of the world and elsewhere. I mean, it's a topic of conversation almost on a near daily basis in a lot of parts of the world now. And what are we doing about it? What are governments doing about it? What are industries doing about it? So I'm guessing, to a certain degree, there must be a better understanding of these issues, related to the environment, and then maybe a certain degree of acceptance that's been taking shape a little bit more so, say, in the last 5, 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, early on, sustainability was like, what is
Yeah,
this thing that we have to
right.
do? And, that kind of thing. Some still have that, but I think where where the rubber hits the road is I think and is the producer. When the producer is open-minded, when they have a mission, um do the work well, empower folks to do their best job, integrate sustainable practices throughout production and holds that, and you know and produces with that in mind. I think that crew follows suit and
Yeah,
they respond to that, because I do think the producer sets the tone for the production.
yeah,
And um and so, yes, you know over the years, more producers have been more open to this sort of thing. They've, heard successes or had successes, here and there on productions, and so they're more willing to kind of take a broader view. And we've been talking about it a lot more in our industry,
yeah. There
which
must
in
be
the
both
early
side
days,
pressure on them as well to conform to a certain degree.
for sure, for
Yeah,
sure. And this conversation has been happening more and more. We've been doing like the Sustainable Production Forum and other events in the industry and talks and panels and things like this. And folks have just been a little more vocal, and that helps to normalize
yeah,
sustainability. And then people have a little more confidence when they approach their next project. So I think all of that helps. But I
it's the
think
snowball, right? It's getting it
exactly.
going. And yeah, where we're at on that hill, how big it is right now, it's hard to say, but at least
Yeah,
there is some movement. It's just hopefully,
there's movement.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, perfect. I would like to segue into another segment here, Zena, and it's something called a water cooler story segment. And here I just ask guests to indulge listeners with a story relating to the profession. And so I'm really eager to hear what you have for us today.
Sure. Well, like I said, I have a lot of stories. But kind of thinking back in my early days, one just really kind of made me hopeful of, the journey I was on, the journey of the industry. And it's I was working on a very large TV series, and um, working through with all departments, thinking through what they were doing. And one day I was walking across the lot and I saw the location manager and the assistant location manager walking toward me. And I was walking toward them. So, hey, how's it going? And I said, oh, great to run into you. We were just talking about how to better outfit our kit, which means think through how they were going to make their recycling and compost bins work better
Mm,
um, for location, and how they could work more effective. And what I realized in this moment, and it's kind of simple, but it was for me just like this wash of like hope, right, was that these folks were solving these problems. They were taking agency
yeah,
themselves
it was on
and
their own.
working through some of this stuff. They were not just saying, well, it's not my job, we're not going to do that. They were actually thinking about how to improve, the operation of their department and integrate sustainable practices in their work. And that show
Mm,
moved, it's a big show, it moved around a lot. And these folks were constantly paying attention to that, and their team integrated it in, and it 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 worked. It
yeah,
worked. And I come back to that over and over and over when I hear folks say, oh, we can't do that.
yeah,
And I know that, yeah, there are barriers in certain jurisdictions, but I know that if folks, we in the creative industries are problem solvers. That's what we
yeah,
do, right? We
exactly.
figure out how to put this amazing thing on the screen.
Exactly.
And so, you know, like, we can figure out how to integrate sustainable practices into our work. And
Right.
these folks were doing it. And I thought, oh my gosh, this, we're going to be okay. Like, so
We're on
that
the
to
right
me
track.
was my early like hope moment. Um, and, uh, and I come back to it all the time. So
Perfect. If you
yeah.
don't mind me asking, how long ago was that? Was that like fairly recent or was that years back or?
Oh, it was early. It was like 2016.
Oh, okay. All right.
Early,
So, I mean, the reason I ask is that like that's probably one of your most excellent case studies, right? And then it's just a mounting of these different case studies that you can present to other clients who are maybe have an interest but are a little bit unsure. And be like, well, here. It has been done. Here are the workarounds. You can flip to
yeah,
page 42. This is how they got around this issue. It's stuff
exactly.
like that really fuels, I'm guessing, again, as an outsider, that pushes things forward, that advances the agenda, and it must be incredibly helpful. And like you said, just quite frankly, uplifting to be around that and to see people buying into it, and really having a top of mind awareness, for some of
For
these major
sure.
projects. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, that's great to hear.
yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
perfect. No, thanks for sharing that. Really enjoyed that.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we are heading into the very last segment here, Zaina. It's something called a crystal ball segment. And as the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And we've spoken to this point a little bit already, but maybe we could just kind of continue on here. How do you see things moving forward now? We've talked about some progress being made in terms of sustainability within the motion picture industry. But the question here is, do you think things are moving quickly enough based on some of the challenges we're facing? It's a tricky question, but what do you think?
I think we definitely have momentum. We're in a decisive decade
Yeah.
across the board, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so we all need to be moving faster. Um, so, so no, I don't think things are moving quickly enough. Um, and while there's a lot of great progress and great momentum, and a lot of cool case studies like what I just
Mhm.
shared, and a lot of stuff over the years. Um, there's still so much to do. And
Yeah.
so we need to be working on it, with real attention, real intention. And just even back to the point on psychological safety, I think it's critical. I think this is just a piece that we need to pay attention to. And I think by doing that, we all can excel and move forward a lot faster.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm super excited about the work done to date, and I'm really excited about all that is to come, and the uh, you know, new relationships to build, to strengthen, etc. Because we really all need a hand in this. We kind of need all hands on deck.
Yeah.
So
No.
um,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting. I find myself, teetering between optimism and then a bit of pessimism at times. Where it's like stories like this, which are uplifting, and we need that. We certainly do. But then other times too, I feel as though we're kind of like it's that I don't know, that metaphor of a frog in boiling water. Where like some people they just "No, I'm just going to continue on. Things will be fine." But meanwhile, things aren't fine. They're not getting better. Like in the grand scheme of things, with environmental issues, we're not moving entirely fast enough. We need, this better than I do, perhaps, but we need major like policy overhauls and fairly drastic regulations to really steer things back on course. And there's a lot of denial, not just in your industry, but across pretty much all industries at the moment. And yeah, like I said, I feel like it's this way and it's this way. It's teetering back and forth between, and depending on the day, I suppose, kind of my mood will shift based off of all these things. That being said, though, it's one thing to acknowledge all of the doom and gloom and being aware of it. I mean, it's useful in that sense because it can sort of power you forward and find alternatives and ways of kind of combating it. And, what you shared today, I think has been really helpful in that light. And that idea of, how psychologically, how we can sort of present ideas in a more effective manner, in essence, or at least identifying that being an issue or a barrier to advancing this agenda is all part of it. So yeah, that gives me great hope. And once again, I've said it a couple of times, I really enjoyed that answer, and I think I'm going to keep harping back to it. So I do
thanks.
have one final question here for you, Zena, and
Sure.
it's in regards to any breakthrough technologies that maybe there's some chatter about within the industry that might help accelerate this shift to greener solutions. Maybe it's improved batteries, maybe it's lighting systems. I don't know. What have you been hearing?
Yeah, it's absolutely, equipment. We're using way more LEDs, etc. LED lights, so the lighting systems are drawing less power. Yes, absolutely. The market is constantly shifting with regard to the battery power stations that are on the market. The capacity, the usage on film and TV productions. Um, and then K-State is coming out about that. Folks are piloting hydrogen fuel
Hmm.
cell
Oh, wow.
stations. Um, there's because we know where the major impacts are,
Yeah.
we know where to focus, right? And so it's yeah, it's it's a constantly changing part of our industry, and super exciting because technology is just quickly evolving and coming online, and folks are figuring out how to solve some of the problems that we have on production, and really working specifically with the industry, and it's really exciting. So um, it's in a couple of years, if you ask me, I might have a completely different answer, because these battery power stations are I think going to really revolutionize how we work, and the focus on electrification is going to just completely transform our emissions profile. So I'm hopeful in a few years we're really going to get those numbers down, and maybe we aren't calling our generator operator a generator operator. We're calling them like the power guy or whatever, a power provider.
Yeah.
Um, but that's where we're going. That's where the industry is evolving, and it's exciting.
Yeah, no, it most definitely is. Yeah, thanks for that. I really, really appreciated all of your insights today. I thank you immensely for it. And I might add that, based off this conversation today, for sure, I guess my mood or sentiment, considering all of this right now is definitely on the higher end of things here. And I think listeners will have, taken that, had a similar sort of reaction to it all too. So thanks again, Zena. I really appreciate your time for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For those interested in learning more about Zena and her work, you can find her through her company, the Green Spark Group. You can find her on LinkedIn, also Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the socials. And also worth noting is that Zena does run an annual event called Sustainable Production Forum. This event is an annual conference on accelerating the decarbonization of the motion picture industry. And this year's Sustainable Production Forum is a global hybrid of an in-person and virtual events. The event kicks off in Vancouver, Canada on October 1st with a networking reception there. There also will be a second networking reception in Toronto on October 6th. And for reference, all of this information, links and all will be included in the show notes. And if you like today's show, please be sure to share. I think it goes a long ways. We learn a little bit more about one another, what we're doing, kind of reduces that tribalism. I think it's a great thing. So yeah, share away. And then also too, yeah, rate, review, and subscribe. That stuff helps more than you can know. And head on over to YouTube. We recently, within the last year, launched a channel over on that platform where we host video conversations, much like we had today with Zena. And the interesting thing there is we will have a slideshow with imagery associated with the chat. So you can kind of take it in on a different level. And then finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as A, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.